Morning, everyone. Welcome to the April 1st meeting of the Appropriations Oversight Committee on Personnel. We're taking up Senate Bill 9, which is the cross-file to Delegate Solomon's bill HB 486 that we heard in committee. This is the state employees collective bargaining, applicability of bargaining processes, and memorandum of understanding. Essentially, this is the collective bargaining bill for USM institutions and consolidated bargaining at other institutions. There are a number of amendments we worked with. The Senate bill came over clean. We have some amendments that we've added as the House to address the acknowledgement of uniqueness between individual institutions. The original bill came over as consolidated everything. On the House side, we have like I said, we have taken into consideration the uniqueness of campuses, the idea that there also is a competitiveness of recruitment of employees. So we've separated out some things to be bargained at the system level and things to be bargained at the local level. I'll go through amendment number 1. As you should all have the reprint and the amendments. Amendment number 1, requiring the chancellor and the exclusive representative to negotiate the terms of the other provisions on page 1, 9 through 15. Amendment number 2 strikes on their entirety lines 2 through 16. So this section in terms of amendment number 2 takes out language that would require alignment with federal standards of, and June, I'm botching the name here. We took out the labor relations board, the National Standards for Labor Relations Board. So this takes out so that we're going off of Maryland's standard. This was something that USM had requested and that the advocates were okay with. Then on the other 2 pages, page 2, we put in here, these are the things that are to be collectively bargained at the system level. And then through page 3, starting 3/4 of the way down, number 2, the presidents of a system or president's designee and the exclusive representative may negotiate and enter into separate agreements regarding the following. These are the issues that can be negotiated at the local level. And also, so if we have some things in here related to grievance processes, this isn't to say that there's what's happening at the system level or at the local level. What happens at the local level can still be negotiated and discussed if there are conflicts with something at the system level. So it's not a end-all be-all at the local level. There's also other avenues for worker protections, management protections, and for negotiations and conversations to continue. June, am I missing anything?
That sounds about right, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, and we have clarifying language related to grievance procedures and the intent related to local level disciplinary actions. So the intent isn't for a disciplinary action at a local level to then not be able to be to supersede a grievance process. You can't be fired and not have an ability to follow the grievance process. It's just that we're making sure that there's a clarification that, well, if we've disciplined you here, there's no other process, whether it was negotiated at the system level or not. That is not the case. We put in language that clarifies that. Discussion on the amendments and the bill. Delegate Kittleman.
Thank you. Could you just remind me why this who thought it was necessary and why?
Sure. So I think that we've seen this bill a couple times. I know I've seen it a few times since I've been on appropriations, and I don't want to sound like I'm saying the same thing over and over again. But I know that we've had folks that haven't been able to collectively bargain at a university level. There's been discussions, and we've had testimony from advocates explaining what it's like to negotiate with USM and folks that have wanted to but haven't had a process in which to do so. So there's been efforts to consolidate all of the campuses into a collective bargaining unit to make it easier. But I think at the end of the day, it's for expanding collective bargaining rights to all USM institutions, especially since they're state institutions. And it seems to be one of the small pockets of state organizations that has made it harder, if not sometimes impossible, to collectively bargain with their management. So that's my answer. I could also throw out to Delegate Solomon as the sponsor of the House version too, if that's okay, Delegate.
I thought that the various campuses all had their own collective bargaining agreements. Am I wrong?
Not necessarily, but I can, if you don't mind, I'll throw out to Delegate Solomon, who also was the sponsor of that. Delegate Solomon.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So Delegate Kittleman, so it's really, I mean, so Delegate Young is right as well, but it's also sort of, so it's about, I mean, in some ways making this more efficient. So, you know, the state system, the state has a system of consolidated bargaining where each agency is covered under one master agreement that AFSCME negotiates directly with the governor. And then they make side agreements that reflect the unique nature of, of issues that come up. Obviously, the Department of Agriculture may have different issues than, the Department of Taxation or MDOT. And so right now, the way that it works for USM is every individual campus has to negotiate an individual agreement. And so not only is that inefficient, we believe, frankly, it's unfair that, certain classes of employees, frankly, that do the same job across the system at each individual campus are negotiating different agreements. So somebody at one institution, doing the same job may get one salary versus somebody at another, or they may be getting, a different disciplinary procedure or a different grievance procedure. And what we heard from many of the advocates, and I think, many of our colleagues have heard this from the university, that they represent and the staff there, that frankly, there is, sort of a game of cat and mouse and sort of circular, we can't negotiate this at the campus level because this is a policy that the Board of Regents sets. And then the Board of Regents says, well, this isn't an issue that we can negotiate with you because your bargaining agreement is with your local university. And so these issues essentially don't get worked out. And our employees, our university system employees, are left completely in a lurch because they don't have the authority to bargain collectively with the Board of Regents and the Chancellor, even though, as we went through in the hearing, there are 80 to 100 personnel policies that are set by the Board of Regents with no input essentially from the employees and the campuses that it impacts.
I guess what I would be concerned about is, as we saw when the $15 minimum wage was under discussion, there's a huge variance between the salaries that are common or the average salaries in different parts of the state. And if we're making a same salary across the board, that would put people who are working for the state government in a position making a whole lot more than the people who are living in certain areas. It just...
Well, I mean, again, I would say that the state system, the state personnel system, obviously that's even, that's 5 or 6 times as large as the university system. The classification of employees that we're talking about here, they do that as well. So, this is again about consistency for state employees. The university system, again, budgets as a whole, as we saw this past summer, university individual campuses often have to go to the Board of Regents and to the Chancellor for approval to tap into fund balances, to make budgetary changes. I think some of them, on some instances, they have autonomy, but in other instances, particularly around budget issues, the buck does stop at the Board of Regents and the Chancellor. And so we are trying to, create some consistency with the USM across the system, the similar consistencies with, the state personnel system for other state employees. And this wouldn't be anything different than that.
Just one last question.
Go ahead.
Did this Board of Regents, are they the ones who suggested this?
This didn't come from the Board of Regents, no.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah, and want to see somebody else had a comment too. Just want to mention that university system schools are considered state schools. The employees are considered state employees. And as mentioned before, there seems to be this group of folks that then don't have the same ability to follow the process that exists in other state institutions as well. It's institutions of higher ed, and we have folks on the Eastern Shore, Western Maryland, Central Maryland. We already have a process for identifying under certain classes within state employees of what their compensation should be, what their career ladder should be. So I think in our minds and generally the advocates and what's the belief that there should be a similar structure if you're a state employee that you have the same benefits associated with that.
That would be nice if it were true with the staff, I guess, that isn't under a collective bargaining agreement has the highest salaries by far in the entire state. So I just thought I'd throw that in.
Sure.
And Mr. Chair, the other thing I was just going to say, if it's okay, and to Delegate Kittleman's point, this bill will not solve every issue. You know, as yesterday, I think further illuminated, you know, for example, on employees getting, you know, hazard pay and quarantine pay, you know, the money that's in the supplemental is only going to state employees. It's not going to university system employees who are, you know, often in similar positions if there's a quarantine dorm on their campus. So there still is, you know, this bill will go a long way to solving some of those inequities, but it's not going to solve absolutely everything. And there still are, you know, you know, areas that are unequal, but this will go a long way to solving some of those issues.
Delegate Valentino Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to try to review a couple things. And I did have a lot of discussions with Delegate Solomon over the interim on the importance of this bill, and I certainly appreciate and support and understand what the bill is trying to do. But at this point, I just want to clarify, we didn't act on the House bill. This bill came over clean from the Senate. And now we have a bunch of amendments, and I appreciate you're using the word we worked on this and we worked on that, but help me understand, I don't think I missed a personnel subcommittee meeting. These amendments, I'm assuming they didn't come from the university system, or they still don't support the bill, or are some of these from the university system, or are these from AFSCME, or?
Sure. So
I would appreciate some
sure.
input into the development of the amendments so I can understand the context.
Sure. So just like any bill, you know, can't always predict what's going to happen with what I think the House believed that there was a opportunity to bring at the advocates USM to the table, which is what we did for, I think, the first month and a half of the session, figuring out where were, where people agreed, and actually having that table to discuss those things to sort of move something forward. When the Senate bill came over, it was lucky that we had those discussions because we had a clean bill, but we also had a robust discussion between the people that this would affect most, the institutions and the advocates, and having an idea of where they stood walking away from those discussions. Obviously, they saw that they got the bill from the Senate that they wanted. Why negotiate or have a discussion on the Senate side, or on the House side? While we discussed at the table what they were okay with, what they weren't, created and
so
moved.
Those are discussions with you and Delegate Solomon and the
These were
campus.
discussions with the University System of Maryland, AFSCME, and the advocates. We were involved in terms of supporting them as well as creating the forum. These amendments come from those discussions, and so it's not, we're not dictating to them. This honestly came from their discussion that they had with us and between themselves.
I'm just trying to, I mean, beyond the hearing, since we were not part of that as the full personnel subcommittee, trying to figure out the context of what's before us. So I think the one thing that I had mentioned was I represent Bowie State University, which is an HBCU in the system that will be subject to this. And the concern that I had was by putting in that the wages and salaries and the, I'm not as concerned about the health insurance, although that can be a big driver, that the other institutions have endowments and higher reserves, especially College Park and other places that they can go to absorb, which I think could be a legitimate thing with respect to consistency in wages and salaries, but something for which, although we just passed the HBCU bill with a lot of money going to HBCUs, is I have not really been able to appreciate what the impact then is, because they don't have a lot of reserve money like the other institutions to absorb the negotiations that College Park, who's a big player, might be able to negotiate and might be able to have reserves for salary and wages. And then I have an institution that doesn't, and I had suggested, but it's not in here, that there be some parameter set in here when wages and salaries go above a certain amount, that we have some mechanism for how that can somehow be addressed or mitigated to an institution that isn't prepared or able to absorb it without them having to go to raising tuition. Was that ever part of any of the discussions at any point in time?
I think I wouldn't say that it's not part of the discussion between both, but I would say that I'm not sure that we should be looking at an institution that has a high endowment or outside sources of funds as a way to supplement a negotiation on salaries. I think what you're trying to say.
They can better absorb it. without
I mean,
going to
absorb it in
tuition.
terms of if they don't have as much money, they might have another source to pull from. I get what you're saying, but in terms of the equity related to salaries and negotiations, that's at the system level and should stay there. I mean, right now, you know, that's what I think we learned from these discussions with both the institutions and ASME and the advocate, that the inconsistency is the problem. And you're not going to, when we have this discussion about community colleges, the concern is that it's going to raise tuitions that are going to go that route, and we're not going to dictate to an institution how they're going to make a decision like that. But they're also not going to negotiate themselves out of a job, out of business, and not have not be able to have the reserves to do their job and to provide an education. I mean, I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying that in practice, this hasn't been the case. And I know that we're talking about universities here, but I'm there was no discussion about endowments or which ones could handle what. It was about what is the work that's required, what is the designation of an employee, and what should be expected of them. And as a system, as other systems do across the country, have to budget for that in a uniform way, rather than a haphazard is the wrong word, but as a piecemeal way, depending on which university that they're at.
No, and Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I'm not trying to debate the merits of the issue on whether or not
Of
there
course
should be consolidated agreements, because I understand and certainly appreciate the philosophy of that. I was trying to really appreciate and understand if there had been recognition of what I think.
Absolutely. And I'm trying to explain that through
Right.
my response is part of the conversation that happened between the two folks that will be dealing with this after it leaves our hands.
Right,
And
now, because
so I'm
I had-
acknowledging that that's the discussion that happened.
And I appreciate that. You've done a terrific job with trying to lead a ship here at the end with a bunch of amendments, and I appreciate the hard work. Again, I just had indicated both to the unions and to the institutions that I'd hoped that these amendments would have included some appreciation of that concern, and they don't, and I was trying to understand that. The only thing then is, could real briefly on the last page 8, section 12-110, I might need another cup of coffee. I'm trying to reread and understand what that means with respect to unrepresented employees and represented employees. June, can you help a little bit maybe?
Yeah, June, if you wouldn't mind.
I'm sorry, Delegate Valentina Smith, could you repeat which section you were referring?
On 12-110, page 8 of 8. So under current law, it looks like the advancement of termination of all faculty and administrative personnel in the university system. And now we're bracketing out administrative personnel and putting in unrepresented employees. And I'm just trying to figure out quickly what that ends up meaning.
I can jump in. Delegate Valentina Smith, it's because administrative personnel are covered under, so in the previous so administrative personnel are covered under exempt, and because bringing in exempt unions, this is basically just saying it's sort of the same language as before, but you're now just referring to unrepresented employees as opposed to administrative personnel, which would have been sort of unrepresented before as a consolidated MOU, because the previous coalition bargaining only included exempt or non-exempt employees.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I hope you appreciate the tenor of my comments, because we had been talking about them for a while, about the concerns that wages could be negotiated, but then the implications of them, what it might mean to the institutions on whether the state could do something or not to mitigate it. So thank you.
I was going to say, and yeah, to address your point, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, the other piece is, these are state institutions, so ultimately, the budgeting process stops with us. And I think what we found, and I participated in several of the coalition bargaining, sessions that the university system has had with the unions. At the end of the day, the folks at the Board of Regents and at USM often approve a lot of the budget issues. We ran into that, with some institutions this year that were trying to, address some gaps that they had based on COVID, that ultimately they still had to go to the Board of Regents, even though they had, control over their own budget, for approval to move money around to address salaries. And often, frankly, they were told they couldn't do certain things. And so, again, what we're trying to address here is that in almost every instance that we've encountered, we find that it's the Board of Regents and the USM, administration that is ultimately making decisions, often on the finances of each individual campus. And so, I don't want to say it's a bait and switch, but oftentimes, again, it is the USM that makes those decisions. And what we're trying to do here is say, if you're making those decisions right now, let's just be transparent about it. Let's say, let's be clear that those are things that should be negotiated between the Board of Regents and USM and the union, with obviously the schools taking part. It's just because the Board of Regents and the Chancellor are sort of the bargained entity does not mean that, the schools are not at the table with them and working collaboratively together to get these contracts.
No, I appreciate that. I think, we're late within a week of learning. This came over. We don't get a perfect world. In a perfect world, I would have liked to pause to be able to at least talk to the university, Bowie State, and understand a little bit more. But I recognize the ramifications of it being the last week of session.
Delegate Wendell Bites.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess it's fair to assume that the university systems and our individual institutions are still opposed to this bill. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so to Delegate Solomon's comment that the buck stops with the Board of Regents and the presidents of the university, it seems that we're more concerned about tying arms behind their back to limit their management and administrative abilities to do what they're supposed to do to provide the best education possible, especially at our flagship university. And I was just wondering, why is it that we keep doing things that continue to take away the management prerogatives when we're saying that we're doing the best thing that we can do for our universities and provide fairness to the employees? It seems that we're more worried about the employees of the university than we are the ability of the administration to provide the best education possible for our students. Would you or Delegate Solomon wish to address that issue?
Sure, and I can mention something that if Delegate Solomon wants to jump in too. I know that we can agree on some things, Delegate, and sometimes we don't. I don't see that the ability to create a table in which to discuss and have an even playing field to talk with management and with workers undermines management in such a way that prevents from providing a quality education that we already are providing. I wouldn't say that this is really trying to put one over the other. I would say, I will admit this, I think it complicates the discussion because it becomes much harder or it becomes a little bit more complicated to dictate when you have to sit at a table and negotiate terms on an even playing field. But I think that's what it's about, and that's what makes a better work environment and a better product in terms of our students and what we're providing them. Delegate Solomon, if you'd like to jump in, you can.
Yeah, Delegate Beitzel, I would say, first of all, when I said the buck stop, I meant the buck stops with the Chancellor and the Board of Regents. That's what we're seeing play out, right? It is not in the system we have right now. The university presidents do not make the decisions. They go to the Board of Regents, they go to the Chancellor for approval. And what we're saying is that is an unlevel playing field because AFSCME right now and our university employees are not able to bargain with the Board of Regents. And to your comment, we have a wide variety of student groups across the system that supported this, including frankly, many from Frostburg State. I think there were issues at Frostburg this year, over the summer with the way a lot of their campus employees were treated that, brought to light many of these inequities. So, we have, again, wide support from students. This isn't about, trying to pick winners and losers. This is about trying to make sure that the folks who often provide, frankly, many of the services that students rely on a daily basis are getting a fair opportunity to bargain policies with the folks that set it. And again, the folks who are setting this is the Board of Regents and the university system, often not the campus presidents.
May I follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely.
So Delegate Solomon, you think it's fair for Frostburg and the people in Frostburg to lose negotiating capacity for salary and wages and other things in one of the poorest jurisdictions in the state, and allow those things to be negotiated across system-wide from, say, at the University of Maryland level at College Park? Do you think that's fair?
Delegate Bleitzel, that's a decision that you will have to make. I think we've talked about, the pluses and minuses of this bill, how the system does not work or works in its current form, again, I will just point to, we have 30 to 40,000 state employees, including ourselves. Those of us that live in higher cost jurisdictions don't make anything different than those of us that live in lower cost jurisdictions in the General Assembly. I think we've had that debate on the floor many times before. And again, 30 to 40,000 state employees. It's a system across the board, regardless of what county you work in. If you work for the state and you work for a state agency, you have a uniform system across the board. So, I don't want to presume to tell you how to vote or what you bear.
Well, I'm sure you're not presuming to tell me how to vote, but I think I also have the ability here to express my views on this bill as you have. So with that, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Not a problem, Delegate. Are there any other questions, comments associated with the bill? I do want to say, and just for background to where Delegate Salmon has been working his backside off on this. I just want to give him credit. And I know that we're, with these issues, especially when it comes to personnel, these are things that we don't necessarily always agree on. But I think that when we get something from the Senate, we can either have a decision to agree or try and produce a better product. And I believe that these amendments produce a better product that was sent to us. And I think that that spirit of keeping with what will move us forward and the system forward in a positive way for employees and for management, I think this is the best path forward. So with that, I'd like to call is there a motion?
Can I ask a quick question, Mr. Chairman, before the motion?
Go ahead, Delegate.
It is that time of year. Delegate Solomon's been working hard, so I imagine, are we prepared to believe that the Senate is going to take these amendments since they sent over a clean bill, or we're just lobbing it back over?
In conversations with them, I believe it's going to be a discussion that we have time for, and that they have time for. But they're going to just. I'm not going to say that they're going to say, "Oh, thanks, House," and take everything that we sent them. But I believe that there's time in which to send over our product and get a response back, and to discuss with them why we thought that this was the appropriate way. So I'm not lobbing it back, but they do know that there are going to be changes to it, and I think that there's enough time between now and Sine Die to discuss those changes.
So hence the reason we need to move now rather than wait to actually have a subcommittee where we hear from the interested parties. I understand now. Thank you.
Move the amendments.
Second.
Second.
Motion on the amendments. All in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Raise your hand. None. Okay. On the bill as amended.
Motion to move the bill.
Second.
Motion to second. All in favor of the bill as amended signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed. I'm recording Delegate Beitzel in the negative, Delegate Kittleman in the negative, Delegate McKay, and Delegate Grice. And let me know when you're recorded. Good, June? Okay. Thank you, everybody. Motion bill passes. Thanks for the discussion as always. That's all the work we have for today. Look forward to seeing you all again on the floor and in full committee. Thank you. Oh, welcome, Madam Chair. I just saw you. I'm sorry. Did not.
It's okay. I voted.
Oh, great. Well, welcome to the party.
Important bill.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank
you.
You guys got a ringer.
Thank you for the hard work, Delegate Solomon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Solomon. All right.